First up is a film called Minari, which I think is one of my favorite dramatic films of 2020. It's absolutely one of my top films of 2020 in general. I'm so excited that people are finally going to be able to see it more widely. It centers around a Korean-American family that moves to a tiny farm in Arkansas to start farming and live that American dream and rise up by their bootstraps and live this very American vision of success. The family consists of 2 parents, 2 kids, and then the mother of the wife comes to live with them from Korea. The father's played by Yeun, who you probably know from The Walking Dead. The mother is played by Yeri Han. The kids are Alan Kim and Noel Kate Cho. And I think the standout performance, honestly, goes to Yuh-Jung, who plays the grandmother. She is just funny and delightful, and I loved everything about her in this. I really hope she gets nominated for an Oscar. I think what this film serves to highlight for me, so there's multiple facets to it. If you come from a background where family is important, this film is going to speak to you. You know, especially if you come from, I would probably guess, an Asian culture, or I see this across lots of cultures, actually, but I personally relate to it as an Asian person, the sort of sense of filial piety and just that obligation to your parents and your family and taking care of each other, that is going to hit hard. If you are someone who has any sort of relationship with a grandparent, you know, this is going to definitely get to you. If you've experienced any sort of generational disconnect where, you don't understand why somebody older than you doesn't get naturally the things that you are dealing with and that come naturally to you. I think an example of this is technology, right? Parents who struggle with like their smartphones or whatever, and you get frustrated at them. This story will speak to you in some senses. The story does not have deal with smartphones, but that's just an example of that. If you have dealt with a language barrier, this will speak to you. If you felt othered, or if you felt FOMO at the success of your peers, or any of these things, this is a universal story, and it's all wrapped up into a tight, almost 2-hour package. And I love the experience of it. I was so invested into what happens with this family. You know, I could not care less about farming. I don't know a ton of people who are super ingrained in the drama of farming, and yet that's just the setting and the vehicle. And I have been pretty vocal about how frustrated I am in that this film did not qualify for the Golden Globes Best Picture. I think the Golden Globes are just kind of a mess in general, but I think what the sort of controversy around this film served to highlight is how Asianness is perceived as other. This is a film by an American filmmaker. It was made in the US. It has at least one American star in it, and yet it's being grouped in foreign language film. And yes, most of it, I would say 70% of it, takes place in Korean, but it's an American film. And I think that the automatic willingness to just qualify it as, oh, this is a foreign film, it's not. It's an American film. And the American experience is something that is so diverse. America is a melting pot. And I was trying to think of, okay, if this film had been made with white actors, would it have been received the same? But you can't make this film with white actors because the story as it is has so many nuances that are specific to the Korean culture, but they translate out universally. I think you could tell a version of this story with other cultures. It wouldn't be this exact story, but the core storytelling and the core emotions and the core relationships are such universal things. And my hope is maybe because this film is coming out right now while we're experiencing this, wave of anti-Asian crimes, which are not actually new, and it didn't start with coronavirus. If you want to do some reading on the history of the othering of Asians, and again, it's not the oppression Olympics. You can't one-to-one compare the experiences of different minorities and different racial groups, but there's absolutely a huge issue going on in the Asian and Asian American community right now that needs to be highlighted. And my hope is actually that when people see this film, it will help people understand that while people may look different than each other, at our core, at human beings, like we are not that different from each other. And there's a connection that you can have that transcends race and transcends gender and transcends, all of these things. So please, 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 please watch Minari. It's just a great film. It's a film about family. And most of us, one way or another, have a relationship with family and have something to relate to in this film. So I'm going to give it 4.8 out of 5. And please, again, watch this movie. And then the other film I have this week is Tom and Jerry, and it is based on the Warner Brothers cartoons. And I feel like I could not find a film further from Minari in terms of heart and warmth and value to the story. I will acknowledge that I am someone who found, even as a kid, Tom and Jerry kind of a tedious cartoon to watch. I just got really frustrated by kind of how mean they are to each other and how selfish, and more often than not, it's not like Jerry is like trying to survive and that's why Tom is coming after him. He's like always building these little fancy palaces and all this stuff. So it's more antagonistic than I think I enjoyed as a kid, and that definitely translates to an adult. I can only imagine that the way that this movie came about is people were sitting around and just kept brainstorming ideas of how do we show these super, super cartoony, but 3D cartoony versions of Tom and Jerry. If you take a look at the trailer, or, even see an image of them, you'll know what I'm talking about. How do we put them in very zany scenarios where they interact with the real world, like real world that we deal with, and that we can show them, climbing on things, and that we'll actually see a curtain move, or a cat scratches something and you actually see the scratches, but it comes from this super cartoon cat. And they just came up with a dozen of those scenarios and went, oh, I guess we need a plot to string those together. And then maybe just spun a roulette wheel and we're like, no, this will do for a plot. The humans in it are played by Chloe Grace Moretz, Michael Pena, Rob Delaney, Colin Jost, Ken Jeong, Paula V. Sharda, and I don't get it. If you want to watch a movie where cartoons interact with the real world, watch Space Jam. Space Jam is great. Watch, Space Jam did this however many, 20 plus years ago. Oh my God, that makes me feel so old. Space Jam did this 20 plus years ago. It also had a thin plot to it, but it was so much more fun and so much more palatable. This was just so painful to watch. I was so bored. I was not amused by their antics. Again, I think this maybe goes back to my not being amused by their antics as a child. I found it really, really freaky that all the animals in this world are super cartoony, and yet everyone else is very real life, live action. And so there are moments where Chloe Grace Moretz picks up a cat and pets it, and it looks bad because the cat itself is also not interacting, right? So she's just sort of waving her hand over, it's a white cat, and it's just sort of waving her hand over this blank space because there's no fur to interact with. It really, the more I talk about it, the more it creeps me out. I feel for parents who are probably very desperate right now and are looking for new content all the time. But I think if you're a parent, you're not going to be very amused by this. I guess your kids might be sort of amused by this, but I would either say plop your kids down in front of the old Tom and Jerry cartoons if that's their type of humor, so you don't have to sit through the flimsy plot parts of this. Or, again, watch Space Jam. I'm plugging Space Jam a bunch here. They're not paying me or anything. I just love Space Jam as a film. I don't know how I feel about the idea of a sequel. But anyway, Tom and Jerry, it's on HBO Max. I can't recommend it. I hated watching this movie. I thought about turning it off halfway through. I don't know why I didn't. But I'm only going to give this 1 out of 5.